How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about the live-action version of Uzumaki. Or, Uzumaki directly translates into Spiral, so sometimes if you're searching for this movie, they may have it listed as Spiral. Personally, though, Uzumaki, that's a cool title. That's what you gotta go with. Anyway, this movie is from the year 2000 and is a live-action adaptation of this big brick of a comic by Junji Ito. I'm a big fan of horror, big fan of comics, reading through Junji Ito stuff. So much of it is absolute classic stuff, and this is great. The Uzumaki, an absolute classic. If you haven't read it yet, you should be able to find this book at any Barnes & Noble. Go read it, it's good. But anyway, as soon as I got this, like the night after I got this, I went and watched it like really quickly because I'm a big fan of the source material and I really wanted to see how they would adapt it. And I was pleasantly surprised. This is actually a really solid movie. Obviously not the best thing ever, but I think, I liked it. It pulled me in, and I really, I really did enjoy it. And I think a lot of other Junji Ito fans will agree that this is pretty solid and probably the best adaptation of his work. And that's really saying something because Junji Ito fans can get kind of picky. I mean, quite recently we had 2 anime series that were adapting his stories, and they were both very faithful, but sadly low budget, and the fans, a lot of them kind of flipped out about that. I thought they were okay. But, the thing is, Junji Ito has such a die-hard cult following, and his stories are super hard to translate. A lot of his stuff is this trippy, surreal, horrific image he drew, and good luck getting that to translate into any other media. Now this obviously isn't perfect, but we did get a lot of cool stuff from the comic in there. And I guess before I ramble too hard on it, let's talk a little bit about the plot. I'm gonna go pretty quick on the plot synopsis and no major spoilers. Anyway, we open up in this small seaside town with our main character, Kyrie, a really nice, good-hearted person, and I am glad that they kept that from the comic. Really a good portrayal of this character here. She lives in this town with her boyfriend, Soichi, and Soichi's father is starting to act strangely. And when she talks to Soichi about it, he'll say, yes, he's become quite odd. But you're too close to this town. You don't know the whole town is strange. You see, Soichi commutes to school, and he talks about being in the outside world and then coming back into the town on his bicycle and getting dizzy just going through the tunnel. The residents don't know this, but the whole town is infested with spirals. There is some strange curse that takes the form of a spiral, and all the different stuff a spiral could be. Spirals are twisting, which if you do that in a physical sense, that could hurt. Spirals are also mesmerizing and infinite. How many different ways could you interpret a spiral for horror? Well, the poor unfortunate students of Kyrie's school are going to find that out as a bunch of different interpretations of this curse start to get into all the other students of the school. So you have Soichi's father going crazy, and you also have other people in town start to go that way as well. And it's a pretty cool and really creative story. And I guess, right off the bat, let's talk about Higuchinsky's directing. I really did like this. I believe he's the same guy that did the TV movie for Junji Ito's Long Dream. If you haven't seen the live-action Long Dream, definitely check it out. It's really good and pretty faithful. So it is kind of trippy and surreal. A lot of people said, imagine a J-horror movie, but with influence from like David Lynch and Tim Burton. And the thing is, it's really hard, you know, Junji Ito stuff being so comic book. I can only imagine if you didn't know this movie was based on a comic book, just being surprised by the strange and bizarre stuff. But, you know, he goes into it with a bit of a sense of humor. You know, like right at the beginning, we see a wanted poster with Junji Ito's picture on it. We know that this movie isn't 100% serious, so it's okay with taking a few larger swings and doing a few kind of out there moments from the comic, and I really am glad it went and did that, and that's where it kind of creates this surreal atmosphere behind it. You know, so it's not so much scary as unnerving, and I really do like his camera work in this movie. All the shots, the shot choices are really well done, and movement in the camera. That is such a big important thing, but the camera will always be moving, or not always, but a lot of the time, and especially when you're doing spiral shots, those are really cool. But there's even a ton of like subtle shots that I really like. Kyrie is about to go into a house and see something scary. Rather than follow her, the camera pulls back, almost as if saying, "You're helpless to help her. We're taking you away from her. She's there, in danger, on her own." There's another really subtle shot that I love in this movie, where it's a point of view of a car driving, and then we get the reverse shot of the characters in the car, but rather than just cutting, it's a super slow fade over the course of this conversation, and at first when you see it, you think it's just the reflection in the windshield. It's a cool idea, and maybe those aren't the biggest cinematic versions, but those are some that really stood out to me. And there's a ton of fun, moving shots with interesting, bizarre, and sometimes surreal compositions, especially when the father's going crazy. It's pretty cool. Also, with the manga being in black and white, the movie isn't in black and white, but I kind of feel it's almost in a faux black and white. A lot of this movie is very green. J-horror really knows how to use its greens, and especially, I think this movie is probably shot on real film, and you can tell it's just such a nice, muted, creepy color palette, but because it is so much black, white, and green, even though it's not black and white, it does have a lot of the feel of black and white, which I really did like. But as far as adaptation goes, one thing I really liked with this movie, slow and focused. You know, a lot of people, when they complain about the new Junji Ito animes, they all say, "Oh, the animation's cheap." Fair enough. But I think the biggest problem with the Junji Ito animes is they try to stick 2 stories in an episode way too often. Let the stories breathe, for goodness sake. And we see that here. How do you adapt this? How do you adapt over 600 pages of comics? Well, pick what you want to put in there and do that right. If you were to adapt the whole Uzumaki comic faithfully, you would need 2 seasons of a TV show. And if you're fans of the comic, you know where that season split's gonna be. But you only have 90 minutes to do Uzumaki. What do? And with this movie, it's primarily focused on the Spiral Obsession Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the first 2 chapters of the comic, and that's going to be primarily dealing with Soichi's father falling under the Spiral Obsession. And that makes a ton of sense. It's a classic opening to the comic, you get some really good imagery out of it, but it keeps the story focused. Kyrie, Soichi, Soichi's father. it keeps it grounded. It's a story about someone falling to obsession and the repercussions that has to the family. And I really did like they didn't try to do the whole freaking thing, because there's no way that would make any coherent sense. So it's primarily the first 2 chapters, and we actually get more stuff with the relationship between Kirie and Soichi, even a little fun photo montage of them as kids. And in the comic, I thought Soichi was a good character, but because of all the trauma that happens to him, he gets kind of withdrawn during points of the comic, and you don't see him as often as I wish. So I did like keeping him in the whole movie, and I did like slowing down and getting their relationship right. And, you know, plus, as I said, they got Kirie right, they also got Soichi right. They're faithful adaptations of the characters. Now, when it comes to what else they adapt selected chapters from the first half of the book. There is a few references to the second half of the book, but if you know how the book goes, that second half, it's probably a good idea to not try to adapt it into live action unless you have oodles of money, because the second half goes nuts. But anyway, various chapters are incorporated in this movie from the first half of the book, and they do them in an interesting way. The manga is very episodic. This happens, then this happens, then this happens. But how do you translate episodic into one long-form story, a movie? Well, they actually take these stories and have them all going simultaneously. So you can see a bunch of the other students at Kirie's school start to have a bunch of little interesting different things happen, and then they spiral, no pun intended, into something bigger at once towards the end of the movie, which really actually does make sense. You know, everything happening one at a time like it did in the comics. It's a longer story that takes place over the course of months and months, so it's sort of like little events sprinkled here. But if you're gonna do it all at once, it's the whole town that's going crazy anyway. They might as well all go crazy at once. And it is a really interesting way to do that. Seeing Jack in the Box Kid pop up really early, that's interesting. You know, seeing other characters that you know are gonna turn into something later introduced well before their time, good. I like that. Now, the thing with these adaptations is they really are just highlights from their respective chapters. The best example, the Medusa chapter, where a girl's hair starts going into spirals and drawing in the other kids' attention. That is just the highlights. They take out Kirie's involvement in that story almost completely. So it's just the girl, you'll see her from time to time wanting attention, and then her hair starts to act up. And then we get a few payoffs with that, but it's not the epic battle that the Medusa chapter originally ended in. It's the setup and the base concept with some of the payoff, but again, just the highlights of the chapter. And you do get a few other chapters. The chapter with the snail is in there as well. Again, primarily highlights. Jack in the Box Kid is in there, but quite unfortunately, we could only get the first half of his chapter in, because you know what I talked about with special effects? The way Jack in the Box chapter ends, good luck pulling that off on film. One thing that I was super sad to see go is the Scar chapter. That's not in here. There is one shot towards the end of the movie that is a little bit of a homage to it, but man, the Scar chapter has the most iconic bit of imagery from the whole comic, and again, good luck doing that in live action, but I really did miss not seeing it. But even though it's just highlights of a lot of the stuff, again, it's a movie, how else are you supposed to fit that in 90 minutes? It was a good way to get the gist of a lot of part 1 of Uzumaki. And I did like seeing, you know, I saw on YouTube a side-by-side comparison between comic panel and footage, there's a lot of super just accurate panel representation, you know? The father doing the swirly thing with his eyes, Kyrie looking up at the big smoke cloud, that super nice, calm introduction of Kyrie walking to meet her boyfriend at the beginning of the movie and looking around the town. That's all there from the comics, and there is a lot of cool stuff that, you know, again, with Junji Ito's art, boy, it's super hard to translate, but they did a good job, and they got a lot of it. Now, as I hinted at earlier, the second half of the comic, good luck adapting that, but for what they had, they did an interesting ending. It is a little bit quick, and, you know, for a lot of the stories, they kind of just pop off really quick, getting to their conclusions. So the ending, it is a little bit rushed, and I do wish, I don't know, I do wish it was something bigger. It does just happen a little quick, but then again, kind of has to, because the way the comic ended, you can't possibly do that in 90 minutes. no way. But from what we got, and it's a case of, you know, resource management with, you know, time. Like, I was amazed that they were able to pull off as much as they did the year 2000, over 20 years ago. They were able to still get a lot of Junji Ito's crazy, surreal, really good, but not live-action friendly art. They were able to get a lot of it, and it was a case of focusing on the first 2 chapters, doing what you could manageably do, and then taking as much of the other fun bits as you could, and just getting the highlights and getting them in there and weaving them into something fun. This movie did come out pretty bonkers and surreal, and again, if you don't know the source material, seeing some of the out there imagery, probably pretty surprising. But man, just as a case of how do you adapt Uzumaki into a movie, this is probably one of the better ways you could go, given the technology and budget and just only having 90 minutes. So I do think this came out really, really good, and I really liked it. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist at the bottom. This should be my Junji Ito playlist, where you can see my review of the comic itself, and you can see a lot of videos of me talking about other Junji Ito things. I unboxed the pocket curses for Uzumaki, and I also talked about the recent Netflix show, and, oh, Higuchinsky's Long Dream. I talked about that as well. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Relevant playlist, Junji Ito playlist on the bottom. Have a good day now.